And I'm sure you all got the email, but for the purposes of the recording, just be aware we have some new resources. Thank you, Sally, on Discover Life. We are prioritizing them on the Andrena page for obvious reasons of where we're working right now in the class. So check those out. It's the first 2 characters of the page that will direct you to the resources that I described. That we've created a Google Drive account for resources, which I think will probably be easier for folks to access than the Microsoft team, particularly when we post new guides and other things that will be on there. And then also the links to David Cappert's guide to the Andrena characters and glossary, which I am referring to regularly. So thoroughly encourage you to check those out. So yeah, I think we'll probably wrap up Trachandrena today using Sam's resources here. So it's Sam's turn now.
Okay, thank you, Claire. I think I'm still sharing, so
you are. We see your browser window right now.
Okay, so we're going to continue with Trachandrena. I'm going to jump to the Excel file here, which if in the last 2, was there or 2 or 3 sessions, I can't recall, we've been using. Just a little review for someone who has just dropped in. Claire sent out this file, modify with notes as much as you like. That's what it's designed for. And we have gone through Rugosa. We're into the mysterious Sigmundi today. And we fixed the column with the names on the far right there so that we can scroll through these many different kinds of characters, a lot of which are subtle, a lot of which is the approach is to look for lines of evidence and weight it accordingly rather than some on-off character that separates each individual species from all the others. A couple have that. It's like Nuda with its very, very sparse scutum pitting, but others less so. And Sigmundi is one of these. So in my notes, it says that it's a lover of spring willows. I have to tell you that I have, I'm not sure that I've collected one and identified it. So it looks very similar. You can see over here in the similar to column for Bessie and Marie. And Marie is normally in the Midwest with a red abdomen. In the East, it is often with the typical brown abdomen. And I should also say that this is a tricky group, so it would not be at all surprising that there are other species hiding in here that have been overlooked because of the complexity. But also, this is part of LaBerge's work in Andrena, and he does really a very good job, and we often find that he's fairly complete. So for Bessie is the other one, and I think that maybe I have, perhaps not, been identifying many things as for Bessie over the years and perhaps have lumped in Sigmundi during that same time period. So if we look across here at what are important features as are illustrated by having the cell filled with a yellowish color, we can see here that in my particular scheme, again, you can feel free to change these. The scutum pitting is important and helps separate other things. You can see it's set at 0. In other words, there's no spaces between. We'll see if that's true in our specimens here. And in comparison to other species, most of which do not have absolute 0. Most have a small number. The exception here being for Bessie, which is, again, one of the ones that it is most familiar to. And I don't see any others. Others have at least some spacing and go up to quite high. This has, by just having a 0, is an indication that there is really little variation among the specimens that were looked at. We looked here, propodial triangle. that the boundaries, so the border between the propodial triangle and the outside area, very clearly demarcated. And then when we look at the sculpturing, again, we're using the yellow as an indicator of this is an important character for the species identification. The sculpturing inside compared to the outside is much finer outside than the inside. So the inside is coarser in terms of the patterns of raised lines and such that occur there. And we keep going. And then the special feature is this, and I have this on deck in the microscope viewer. Hind tibia may be more cuneate than most, maybe not. And importantly, we have this character. It's easy to read up here. Hind tibia may be more cuneate, inner hind tibial spur with bend or kink in it that makes it appear to be slightly S-shaped. This, as I've noted here, often hard to see, very difficult, because a lot of times that leg is tucked next to the abdomen or next to the thorax, and you just don't have access to those tibial spurs, which are on the inside of the leg, the hind tibia. And there's two, right? So we'll see a picture, one of which is the one that is in play, and that's the hindmost one, and the other, which seems to be almost inevitably a slightly shorter and straighter. And then I have a note here associated with willows in the early spring. Okay, so let's see what we can see here in terms of specimens. And I have a very, I was going to facetiously say recent specimen, but this was collected in 1888 and is on loan from the Smithsonian because I've had a hard time figuring these out and thought I would go to the source. Collected or identified originally by Viereck as a paratype for, I don't know if I have the authors in there, but presumably if he's doing that, he probably was the original author for this. So so what we're looking at is here's the tibia. This is the base tarsus at the apex. Yeah, it would be the apex. Would it be the apex? It would be the bottom, which would depend. In this case, it's apex because it's upside down, so the specimen's upside down. So this would be that would be apex. Sorry, just little musings on my own terminology. You have, this one would be pointing to the rear if it were upside down. And you can see there is this shallow S-shaped kind of aspect to it. Pretty darn subtle. A quick look might have just called that to be, and we'll, on the next specimen or the next species, we'll pull up the species and do a comparison. You might say, oh, well, that's just a little bit curved, but it is slightly kinked, particularly up here. So I struggle to see this sometimes. So that's probably one of the reasons why I rarely identify the species, or it may very much be a northern species and something I just don't cross down here very often. And here is the smaller, slightly shorter, slightly thinner, weaker other tibial spur. Okay, so we did mention that the hind tibia tends to be a bit more cuneate. I'd have to go back and look at all of them to see, but you can see there is quite a, if you can see through the hairs here, quite a broad angle at the base here of the tibia, and would certainly be called cuneate, and is definitely not narrow. It's a little bit difficult to see because of the hairs, but I can tell from this that it goes from here to here. So on the spectrum of leg shapes, it's on that cuneate end of it. Again, other Trachandrenas may have something fairly similar. Okay, so I'm going to pull the specimen and we're going to flip it over, and we're going to look first at the scutum, which was identified as having no, okay, sorry for the sidetrack. I'm trying to think, what did I do with my tags for the specimen? And I'll have to find them later. And now I put them in a safe place. Oh, I see them. Okay. I don't want to mess around with paratypes tags. Okay, so we're going to take a look at the scutum. Should have very firmly in the no spacing between the pitting on the scutum. There is a grand big pin running right through it, but we should be able to see around the edges what is going on. All right, now there's also old specimen. Let me just see if I can dip in there. Okay, so I think you can see around the edges that basically all the pits that are visible here, we'll look for another specimen too, are touching one another. And that is a character. And I think I'm going to switch to another specimen to get some variety. I want to keep, there's multiple labels on that one. Move to this one, which I don't have to be. In the old days, they loved to put on many tiny labels onto their specimens. Okay, so often on paper that is not acid-free, so they're all in various stages of decomposition itself. Okay, here, this is another ancient specimen. But I think it illustrates pretty easily the idea that the propodial triangle, okay, so here's the scutellum, metanotum, and then the propodial triangle. There's a fringe of hairs sort of at the back end of the metanotum, so we can't see quite the base of the propodial triangle, but it's running right about there. And then you can see pretty crisp lines, very crisp lines, as a matter of fact, that are carinate lines that are differentiating the edge of the propodial triangle. Here's the clipped tip, so the tip is going down to the posterior face, and instead of having a nice smooth line, with which many bee species do, it has a raised line running across the end, and then the remainder is below that line. That's sort of a definition of Trachandrena. And the light is a little dark here, so I actually going to change the light, boost it up a bit. So if I go here to that feature, it's very small on my computer, and bump it up. Okay, that should be good. Yeah, we can see a little bit better. What we're looking at amidst the age and dirt here is a relatively few crossbars, raised lines, striations, if you will, reticulations in here. And then outside, and I'm going to make this a little more visible in the computer. And you can see that it's almost as if it's just a series of bumps. It's so finely divided. So other...
Hey, Sam, we just noticed that your pointer, while we can see it move around, it's not as big as it usually is. Is this because it's in the because you're having to do this through the browser, or question mark?
Well, that's interesting, because I see it as very big. So you can see this moving around. What is it? Does it look like an arrow to you guys? I see it as a big crosshair.
It's a tiny black crosshair.
Oh, let me go and change it again. I see it as a big black one, but let's just see if we can do a quick change. I'm not sure why that is happening. Mouse pointer size. See, I have it at 9. I'm going to zero it out. Now it's tiny. Do you see the tiny one now?
We do.
Okay, now I'm going to change it. I'm going to change it back up. Now, is it big?
No, that's weird.
And so
Usually
it's not
you'd
just
at least be able to see it on here.
Pardon? I'm going to change the pointer color to pink. Did you see it as pink?
No.
Okay.
How strange.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on and what I could do to change.
Could you click the one that's not, I don't think this will work, but the one that is not the color change one, but the one left that has the black and white? Maybe it'll just help us increase contrast.
Okay, it's still very big here.
Oh, now it's pink.
Now, that's weird because mine is not pink. Mine is white. And mine is still big.
How
but
weird.
You see it as small and pink.
Yes, we do.
All right, I'm going to change it to really big. No difference?
No difference. But at least it's pink. Maybe that'll help us keep track of it. I'm not sure.
It seems some odd lag. Make visual feedback for touch points darker and larger. And I'm afraid to touch that one. Okay, well, we'll have to make do. It's showing up as a giant crosshairs on mine. Is yours a crosshairs or a mouse or an arrow on this?
Yeah, on this, it's now a normal tiny crosshair.
Okay.
So I guess we'll work with this for today. Apologies,
sorry.
Everybody.
Yeah. Anyway, so outside and inside, quite different. Now we'll shift to the last of the features, which was the T1. So if you look at the pitting on T1, they're almost on top of each other. In fact, in a few cases, it looks like they are overlapping. So for example, in here, in this area, they're very close. A few are touching, a few are just a fraction of a pit width difference in terms of the gap between. So let's go back. So do you see a big plus here or regular?
Regular white.
Okay.
Maybe really light yellow, but I think it's white.
Okay. All right. So if we go back to looking at this screen, actually this plus is a little odd and different too. And we go to pitting on T1 is 0.5 to 2. Oh, that's Spiriana. Nope, it's Sigmundi. 0.5 to 2, which I would have said is closer than that. So in my book, it would have more fit this one, 0.25 to 0.5, which is Cyanothi, or 0 to 0.4. This is T1. That clicks Forbesii. So again, not sure how well defined this species is. We look at the depressed proportion, and 0.5 to 0.7 is pretty normal. That would be very similar to Forbesii, and that's a pretty firm kind of thing. And you can see outside and inside the difference is highly contrasting, makes Forbesii Marie and Sigmundi line up very distinctly. So you get into the differences. For example, here is Sigmundi and here's Forbesii. Forbesii goes from 0 on scutum, 0 to 0.5, Sigmundi 0. So not a lot of differentiation there. If we look at Marie, it's 0.2 to 0.7. 0.2, very close, to overlappings in a lot of ways. And so the S thing seems to be the primary way to tell these things apart, but that is not a lot to go on. So let me pull the specimen and see if that has a very viewable hind tibial spur. Yeah, this one's difficult to see. And yeah, You know, is it an S-shaped or not is sort of an open question in my book on this one, this particular specimen. This is why I struggle with this species, because here are some specimens that were identified by Laberge and compatriots. I'm going to pull a couple more paratypes here and take a look at them. You can look at me looking at them. And I'm looking at T1, has some spacing between, scutum, super, overlappy. Can I see the tibial spurs? I can. Got pollen all over everything, but I can't tell if it's willow or not. And when I'm looking at these hind tibial spurs, I'm like, yeah, so subtle that I'm not sure. So I really don't like this species. This may be in that category of perhaps it's not a legit species. I need to review. I don't know what the males are like.
I'm going to offer in the in our species page. It looks like this is reprinted from the Laberge 73. Mm-hmm. It also adds the female has a second metasomal tergum with the apical area slightly longer than the basal area and relatively weakly punctate. So maybe we could look at that since the rest of this is so strongly punctate. That might be something distinctive.
Okay. Yeah, I'll pull the specimen again. So let's play with our favorite paratype here. And so, Claire, are you saying that the depressed area is supposedly weaker, or the basal area is supposedly weaker? Or could you read it again, perhaps?
I am trying to, but Discover Life just crashed on me. So let me, I can go back in the captions and find out what I said. The second T2 apical area slightly longer than basal and weakly punctate.
Okay. All right. So here, to orient, here is the boundary with T1. Here's the boundary with T3. Here is the dividing line between the depressed area and the basal area. And you can see the basal area pretty well. There's a lot of pits. They're not quite overlapping, but they're pretty darn close. They're probably less than one, certainly less than 1 pit diameter on average distance from one another. So this is where we're going to take a look, and I'll change the focus. And we have a little bit of an issue with glare. It's definitely sparser. So you can see pit. These pits are far more than a pit distance apart. Is that significant? I'm not sure. It certainly matches the description. Was that mentioned in Laberge as an important species characteristic, or just one of many characters?
It doesn't say whether that is like something that distinguishes fully from another. The whole paragraph is, this is a relatively uncommon and widespread species of northern North America. Close relative seems to be Andrena saliciflorus, distinguished chiefly by shorter tergal hairs. Sigmundi is characterized in both sexes, but particularly in the female sex, by having the posterior hind tibial spur bent and slightly expanded in the outer third to 1/2. Female has T2 with apical area slightly longer than basal, relatively weak punctation, and then a bit about males.
Yeah. Not the greatest, I would say. So DNA at some point will help with this, hopefully. Okay, let's go on to Spiriana. So Spiriana is very close to Heraclei, and both of these, as you'll see here, have the entirely smooth and glossy area below the central ocelli. So very different from the other species where you have striations in a couple cases, or you have lots and lots of pitting and a degree of microsculpture that dulls it down, and it's a little bit busier. These are shiny. So we'll go here and take a look at what else is differentiating this from the others. And you can see here the maximum distance to the rim of the eye is quite large, 0.7 to 1.2. Our friend Heraclei, its counterpart, is about the same also, so no help there, but helps differentiate it from other species. When we keep going, we see here T2 is got quite a large depressed area, or lengthy, 0.8 to 0.9 is in the depressed category. We look at Heraclei, it's still pretty substantial, 0.75. You know, can you tell 0.75 from 0.8? Probably not. So now this is where the two clearly differentiate. So pitting on T1 is very sparse. So the distances are 3 to much greater than 3 in Spiriana. And then up in Heraclei, they're very close, 0.25 to 0.5. So that's a pretty darn dramatic. That's the kind of character you would love to have. So here's a note, sometimes has hints of orangish to the integument of the hind tibia and tarsal segments. So that is good to note. And the only other species that really has that is here in Hippodes, which usually has bright orange tibia and tarsal segments on the, at least the hind legs, but I think on all the others too. I'm not 100% on that. All right, so let's dig in and pull out a Spiriana. Get a clay ball here. Yeah, this will show pretty good. So we're going to start.
You just mentioned the similarity between that and Hippodes, but you also mentioned Heraclei earlier. Yeah. What is the, will you be talking about that shortly?
So the only reason I mentioned Hippodes is because Hippodes has, as you can see on the screen here, it has orangish hind tibia and tarsal segments. And Spiriana sometimes has some of that. It's listed here as dark brown, and we can check to see if they have that. But there was just a note at the end that there's hints sometimes of orangish in the integument on the hind tibia and tarsal segments, which would line up as being potentially, the common Hippodes species. And Spiriana is around, but not super common. And if we look, all the other characters are very different. So let me go to the screen here and bring into view, get this back up and running, and get into view the head of the specimen to clarify what we mean by smooth and shiny in the area below the front ocelli and why that is different. I'll bring it up even more. This is old specimen, so it's a little bit ripply, not because it originally was. In other words, something is dented in here for some reason. But I guess what I want you to notice is that there are pits here, but in between the pits, there's no real additional microstructure, no little lines shagreening the area or dulling it down. It's all very smooth and very mirror-like. So that and Heraclei are the two species that have that characteristic, that very shiny area between the middle ocelli and the antennal base, and here very distinct. And we'll try and show that in another specimen too. And if we, now that we have the head in here, you could see here's this quite large distance between the eye and the bend in the facial fovea that's defined by this going from very fat to very thin. that in some species is largely absent. So this facial fovea continues down, and so there's very little distance in here. And it's not just this species or Heraclei. I need a little bit of water. That has that big gap. Several others do too. But it's a pretty well-defined character that can be helpful in winnowing out alternatives. Very defined, very narrow at the bottom. I'm not sure. My voice is very happy right now. I'm not sure why. Okay, so now the main character difference then, since we have this one, and we'll just show a couple other specimens, is the amount of pitting on T1, much, much less than Heraclei. Heraclei is less than a pit apart, and this is far more than a pit apart. We'll see if that is true on this specimen. Move this into place. Well, actually, here is a good example in contrast to the Sigmundi thing that we saw last time, where here is, you can see the definition of the triangle, and certainly you can see the definition of the tip of the triangle where it bends over and down to the face, to the posterior facing face of the propodium. But you can also see there's not a whole lot of difference in terms of the sculpturing. Sculpturing is about as coarse inside as outside, not a whole lot of difference there. And in contrast, if this were the previous species and several others, this would be very, very finely divided and very dramatically different between the outside and the inside. Okay, but we are not interested in that. Oh, darn it. We are interested in the first tergal segment. And we are looking to see what the spacing of the pits are. Ooh, that is so shiny. But there we go. So there's a lot of reflection here. But you can see, maybe I'll just bump up here a little bit more. Fine tune the focus. What you can see though is these distances are very, very far apart. There's no way you would ever call that less than a pit diameter apart. So this is a very nice character for separating the two. So if you see the smooth portion of the face above the antenna and below the ocelli, plus a very sparsely pitted area, you know that it is Spiraena. We will jump. I'm just going to show another specimen. I haven't prefixed these.
Hey, Sam, when we look at this next specimen, having fun today looking at our species pages and the quick notes on there. It says, basically, while it is like kind of straight down from that angle, the fovea doesn't curve. It does have a more dramatic angle such that the bottom of the fovea is more narrow than many others and ends much closer to the compound eye, rather than being like straight down and having a large gap all the way down on that margin.
Okay. Yeah, so it curves back to the eye. Let's see if we can see that on this filthy.
But not as like curvy. It's not like a C curve. It's like just more like the angle does that.
Uh-huh. So a little bit difficult to see. So, but here is the facial fovea, the upper part, and you can see it curves. It's now there's becoming a gap here, and it curves there, and then here it is running back, like you mentioned, Claire. I think I'm going to knock down the brightness here a couple notches, back to 300. Okay, Again, a lot of reflectivity, even in this very ancient, these are probably all over 100 years old. So here again is this distance, but isn't that neat? Like your specimens could be looked at in 100 years by some space age students. Who knows what they're going to be doing? And who knows if humans are even going to be around. So now we go back and we try to take a look at this very smooth part of the face between the ocelli and the base of the antennae. And you can see it again. It's often easier when you have a specimen in your hand and you can rotate things back and forth. But I'm trying to show a little bit here. Yeah, what you're looking at is, and we'll, on the next specimen, we'll take a look at this area too and have it as in contrast. It's smooth between the pits, and it's basically like you have pitting on a mirror. So I think that largely covers that pretty well-defined species. Once you get the ocelli thing down. And we'll move to the last one, Virginiana, which is another sort of, this is sort of, I think of it as one of the most generic of the Trachandrenas. So let's take a look at what makes it special. Reconnect my drive. So very close to Hippodes and Miranda, and one more, and Quintilis. So Hippodes would be the one with the orange tibia. Miranda and Quintilis are pretty generic. We'll see what's the differentiation going on here. So the fat to thin ratio of the facial fovea. So this shows that there is a pretty good ratio. So it's on the narrow. So there's a fatter and there's a narrower area, rather than some of these others where you have 1.5 to 2 and 1.7 to 2 and 2 to 2.5, showing that there's not as great a difference between the fat area and the narrow area. This has this next down. So if we contrast that with Quintilis and Hippodes, so there's 2, that's not very different. And Hippodes 1.7 to 2, also not very different. So, but I think it's bringing it out in comparison to other species besides its very similar kin. So here we have the relatively unusual state of the so this is the internal propodial triangle. So that's the triangle area itself. And we have very tall carinae. So those would be the lines that break up and reticulate the inside of the propodial triangle into cells. And they are separated into long longitudinal rectangles, not as in Quintilis, which is broken up not into rectangles, into basically probably a chain-like reticulation kind of thing. This is more traditional, like most of the other species, long rectangles. And this is showing that the border of the propodial triangle is absent, so there's not really even much of a line separating the inside of the triangle from the remainder of the propodium. We'll take a look at that. And then the sculpturing inside the triangle compared to outside, it says the inside is only very, very slightly more coarse than the outside. So again, the propodial triangle is not well differentiated from the rest of the propodium. It's got a dark brown in contrast to Hippodes, which matches a lot of the structural features, is orangish in terms of the tarsal segment. And we have the depressed area is 0.6, so that's equivocal about in the middle. What does Quintilis has 0.5? That's not very different. And Hippodes also has something similar, but 0.6 is probably differentiating it from some of these really long depressed area species. we have pitting on T1. So you can see there's a bunch of characters that you have to kind of weigh together to get through to the ID and confidence in your ID of the species. Pitting on T1, 1.5 to 3. So, you know, spaced apart, certainly greater than 1, not close together like a few of the others. And just my note, very generic for the species. So let's see, let's first go to the ocelli area, and we'll take a look there and do that to be in contrast with what we were looking at when we were looking at the last species, Heraclei. Well, not Heraclei, Spiriana and Heraclei. And this is pretty good. Again, we're dealing with these 100-year-old specimens. Interesting to think, where were they collected? Who was collecting them 100 years ago? That's pretty amazing. So everything else from 100 years ago is gone. So take a look at this. You can see here that it's quite different. So the pits are very much closer. The area between the pits here is all sorts of sculpturing, pretty dramatic, you know, raised lines. It's certainly not a flat surface into which pits have been placed. It's almost a moonscape. There's things that almost look like striations and thing in here, but anyway, quite different from what we were looking at. So now we get to the ambiguities of this species. So it's a little bit difficult, so I'll outline it with my apparently very small crosshairs. And so here's the facial fovea. And so what we're saying is that this fat area is, in comparison to other species, does not contrast as much as the other species. In other words, the thin area is broader than the others. It is also not very far from the eye. And this area here, this edge of the facial fovea, largely follows the eye at about, some relatively small distance here. You don't have that curving effect that you did with the last species and several other species. So there's one characteristic. We might have to go back to the thing to look at what the others. Pitting on T1, so we'll go there, was 1.5 to 3. And looks pretty. This is pretty tight, I'd say. 1.5 to 3 is what it's supposed to be. I'd say, well, you can see some spacing in between there. I could see 1.5, but I'd say in some cases, well, maybe through here. Can I get any closer? Okay, I can see that in looking at a little more things. You have some variation here. This area right here is quite close. This area right here is much further apart. So maybe we should have broadened out the spacing on the pits to encompass some of that differentiation, at least with this specimen. Okay, let's look at the propodial triangle. If you recall, there is relatively little contrast between the inside and the outside, and there is, so, you know, you can tell this is definitely coarser than the outside, and there is, in my mind, a line on this side. On this side, it's a little vague to tell it apart, but we'll look at another specimen to see how that lines up in terms of characteristicness. And we're not going to look at it, but the legs are brown. So let's look at another specimen and see if in its life they have that. Let's look at the propodial triangle area again, since we were just looking at that.
I'll also note that we have stated that is a rare vernal bee in collections. And females are noted for vertex greater than one ocelli diameter. And I read something else here.
Is that in LaBerge or just one of our notes things?
Just one of our notes at the top.
Mm-hmm.
From LaBerge also includes females of Virginiana differ from those of Miranda by the more sparsely punctate vertex, which we've already looked at. Oh, no, there was something else. Okay, I'll interrupt if I can find the other little thing I found.
So propodial triangle area, you can kind of, I wouldn't say that the boundary is completely absent, but it's pretty darn vague. In other words, the propodial triangle area sort of bleeds into the sculpturing of the others. It's slightly coarser. In other words, there's bigger cell structure in there than on the outside, but it's not nearly as dramatically different as other species. It doesn't jump out. I mean, with a little inspection, you can say, oh, clearly there's a triangle. And we'll take a look at the fovea. Oh, if we look at T1, which we have right about here, we can see again, you have this variation. I would say that's closer in a lot of these particular cases than 1.5 and 3. So I think I'm going to bump that up. I'm going to assume that these old specimens were identified by LaBerge and company. So, let's see, 1.5 to 3. I'm going to change it right now. I'm going to change it to 1. And
I found it. So just in general, overall, the vertex with 2 rows of pits. That might be interesting to check.
Okay. Is that our note or LaBerge's?
We don't indicate it, so I believe it's our note.
Okay. And so theoretically, sparser.
I wanted to see the 2 rows thing that we talk about.
And these could have been from specimens. I got a whole bunch from John Asher. Let me go all the way. So you can see, I think that you mentioned, Claire, that this distance here is greater than 1. And you could, we don't have an exact measuring tool here, but you can see that this distance here is greater than the distance across the ocelli. If we look at the vertex here, so the vertex is, and generically would be from the backside of the ocelli up to the rim here, and from this vantage point. A little bit difficult to say whether that's 2 exact rows, but there is about 2 row-ish in there. So I'm not sure, again, if that's going to differentiate much. Let's look at the thing here, because we have information on the ocellular distance, I believe. Vertex height. Oh, it says 1.5 to 2. So that's pretty tall. You can see, well, some of the, a fair number of these others are also pretty tall. So I'm not sure that's difference. So I could see that as at least 1.5 on that. And we are gaining some capabilities here. We hope we're pretty close to being able to do bunches of specimens with DNA barcoding. And while we'll just be doing CO1 initially, and that's not always able to differentiate closely allied species, but it can a lot of times. And so hopefully in these little kludges of very close, ambiguous groups, Hylaeus, Perdita, all of those kinds of things, that we can help separate them out with DNA and then go back in and get more clarity on the morphological features. I don't have anything more. I do have all the specimens here in a nice little box from the ancient ones, and I'm happy to pull any species in Trachandrenas that we have been speaking about. Does anyone have any requests to go back and look at any of these?
Speak now. You can unmute.
Or have observations about their specimens? Getting my paratype tag back on the specimen before I forget. Just mention, not sure Claire has, but we are in the process of creating a much larger collection space for specimens, and we'll have a much more extensive set of specimens for each species, hopefully, in the near future, in a new building that is not going to replace this building. It'll be, it's the research annex in our parlance. And we're going to have, we already have 800 drawers, so we can fill them up with many, many, many more specimens to make people's trips out here more valuable, because we'll have a lot more reference material. And ultimately, we'll not ready yet. We'll be interested in recruiting specimens from other people so that it can be a hub of both DNA barcoding and morphological taxonomy work in the East. Similar to Logan, but Eastern.
Hi. Hello.
Hello.
I've participated, or I've watched a few of the of y'all's several of these B seminars. I'm a recent graduate from Texas Tech University, and I worked with Scott Longing there. And this is just a never-ending, incredible resource that I really appreciate, that I still get to be a part of, at least for now. But I just wanted to say thank you, and I think.
Well, I don't know about out at Texas Tech, but I know John Pascarella in what's the name of that little prison town that he's in there east, that he's working on Bees of Texas kinds of things, and we've been trying to encourage him, because he has done the Bees of Florida guides, to have himself and his students, but it can be you too, really augment the Texas aspects to the Discover Life guide. So really, it's useful in the eastern part of Texas, but it doesn't even really, for most species, doesn't really cover the eastern species either. So,
well, I've used John Pascarella's guides quite a bit, and unfortunately, I'm no longer in Texas. I'm in Kentucky now. But I mean, if there's need for more ID guides for eastern bees, I'd love to find a way to help with that.
Yeah. Oh well. You can contact me and Claire offline, and there's a couple things. One is we have all of Mike Ardhuser's lovely guides that he hasn't published, but he has made available, and Claire has made them available through some storage space on Teams that people can access. Is that right, Claire? Can you tell people?
Yep. But they'll also, if they haven't already, been moved into the Google Drive. I have to check
Mhm.
that zip folder though, because I'm not sure if everything in there is everything that he had updated based on the kind of feedback from sessions like these. So he should hopefully be back with us in a few weeks or months.
He recently, as in maybe 2 months ago, I think, set an updated version 5.
I think so. Yeah. So I'm not sure if that's, I have to check on that.
Yeah.
And it'll also be we have a folder of those on the Elmira site. Not on the video recording site, but on the
Yeah.
site that leads you to the like our homepage there. And we'll be, Dan and I are going to upload, we're making some changes to that. So that'll be updated as well.
Awesome.
Cool.
Okay.
Well, so in any case, what we've been doing, but slowly, is taking. So the nice thing about Discover Life is you can have as many characters as you want, and they can be overlapping, and they can be in some ways competing with one another. So we have the stuff that we put together, but we've been adding Mike's. So Mike is very much old school dichotomous key guy, but you can take apart his keys and put them into Discover Life, and then then we acknowledge this is from Mike. And then if people want to, they can key out their specimens using Mike's keys in the same platform on Discover Life. So, but someone has to do that. So we've done that for some. And if you're interested in that kind of lovely tedium, I love it a lot. But I was just looking at the Hileas key, and I don't think it's up on Mike's thing. And we'd be glad to work with you on how to convert it.
Okay.
A lot of it is just making the language in sync with the language on Discover Life.
That makes sense.
So yeah, email us and we'll set you up.
Thank you. Thank you for that opportunity. I'll send you an email here pretty soon.
Okay, great.
There's like an example of what we're talking about on the Serotina guide.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'll take a look at that here in a minute.
Yeah, there's a couple others. And then other people have been uploading pictures. So if they have good pictures of some of the usually, well, actually not always, because sometimes we have ignored the most common species because like, who needs a picture of that? It's so common. Let's just do the weird stuff. Anyway, the guide can, particularly if you have Western material, we certainly can accept and encourage people to upload their pictures of some of the specimens.
That's excellent. I would definitely love to have more pictures on Discover Life. That would be incredibly useful.
Yeah. So if for whatever reason you have access, you're doing it, you know someone, we can show you how to upload them.
Okay.
You can also, I'm not saying that this would be a rapid change that we'd be able to accommodate, but if there are characters that when you're going through that you're like, I really like a diagram of something like that. We have some running lists of things that we're trying to prioritize there, and we get through a batch and then have to come back to it later. But that is useful feedback because sometimes, like Sam said, we're looking through things and we already know what that looks like, so we don't bother with a picture of it.
Yeah,
right. These guides are definitely community affairs. So we have most of the guides have had multiple people working on them. We're constantly finding little problems like, oh, let's change the wording, or who knows? They've been worked on for 20 years now, so there's always something.
Okay. Well, I don't want to keep y'all, but thank you for talking with me, and I look forward to participating in next week's seminar.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Yay.
Anything
all right,
else?
Sam, what do you want to start on next week?
Gosh, I don't know. I mean, we could actually, I could track down some specimens of Nomata. Most of my collection is at the Smithsonian right now, but we could go, I could try and scrape together a bunch of the basic specimens and go through, because this is something that everyone struggles with, and just go through how to think about, show some of the characters under the microscope. This tibial CT is just sort of everyone's like, what the heck? So maybe we might as well just do Nomata. I have enough material around that I think we can pull it together.
Okay. And then wait to come back to Andrena till Mike and Rob are back around.
Yeah, I mean, we can continue
that might
with
be a good
Andrena.
idea.
We can continue with Andrena too, but your call.
Well, why don't you send in some votes? We're hoping to get Mike back, but he's in the field. And then I don't know. I don't think Rob's joined us, but then there's Rob Jean, who is a folk in private practice who loves Andrena so much it was inspiration for one of his children's like middle name or something. So it would be great to have Rob join us when he's available. Just, it's field season. So might be a good idea to take a pause because your other cheat sheets are for males.
I think his
everybody agrees
middle name,
females are more useful at the beginning.
I think his child's middle name is Trachandrena.
Not sure about that. We'll find out. We'll ask him.
Or imitatrix. That would
be a fun one.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so Claire, maybe ping those guys and see if they're available. And if they're available, we'll do Andrena. And if they're not, maybe we'll break out and do, because they really do have a much greater interest and depth of information on Andrena than I do. So it would be nice to have them come in. They basically work on all these too. So I don't know why I'm saying that, because they're going to have a nice balance point to pretty much anything we do.
Yep. Rob was my first class, so 10 out of 10.
All right.
My first and only class. All right. Well, we'll see you next week. I'll let you know in the daily and in the update what we're working on. Send your votes. See you next week.
All right. See you, Claire. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.